So it's probably propaganda. I do know that he didn't graduate from high school, but he's got 3 master's degrees and a PhD from Harvard. Okay. But I will read some of this. I don't know all this. I'm going to touch on it. He was initiated actually in 1974, and he was, some people would not consider this a good quality, we do though. He was the first disciple of Prabhupada to enter the academic arena for the sole purpose of establishing Vaishnava thought within the intellectual arena. He talks about he got his bachelor's of American, further another master's in the University of Chicago, 2 from Harvard. He has many qualifications. His doctorate at Harvard was in comparative religion, with training in the history of Christian mysticism, philosophical hermeneutics, thank you, I'm not a scholar, obviously, and a specialization in Sanskrit and Indian studies. So in this class, he's going to speak about, I think everybody knows, his Gita translation.
But no, we wouldn't know.
No?
It just came out a week ago.
I think they might have heard of it before they come to this.
Maybe.
We paid a number of scholars to give endorsements. And we're happy to have him here.
It is really fun being here so far. This is great. I haven't been to New Vrindavan for about 20 years. So this is nice to see so many old friends, and I'm the old. And it's I think a nice opportunity to come and to perhaps share a little bit about the. Please come in. Please find seats up here if possible. There are more seats up here. To share a little bit about the sort of journey through which I went in doing this Bhagavad-Gita. But I would like to invite any of you, all of you, to be as rigorous with me in questioning what it is that I did, why it is that I did this, and what was my intention, and even questions like, what were you thinking? Yeah, what were you thinking? Who the heck are you to do this? What qualifications? All of your mundane external qualifications, but what about your spiritual qualifications? Have you even any? I want any of you to be brutally honest with me about really what's on your mind after you hear a little bit about the journey. So what I'm going to do is just talk for about 15, 20 minutes. I'm in the midst of a very learned audience here. You're all my God brothers and God sisters, so I really want this to be interactive. I want it to be very free and comfortable here. Many of you know that Srila Prabhupada wanted expertise to be among us, to establish Krishna consciousness in Western culture, modern culture. And so, of course, many of you may know that in 1970, I believe, four, the Bhaktivedanta Institute had begun. And, of course, that was primarily emphasizing the natural sciences. Even so, at that point, Ravindra Swarup and I were talking, and I was sort of helping out with temple management while he was finishing up his doctorate, and he kind of came to the movement with unfinished. So I sort of managed the temple for him, and Prabhupada came that year, and Ravindra had invited scholars there with Prabhupada in Prabhupada's room. It was a lot of fun to see Prabhupada interacting with the scholars. But the idea is that many of you know that Prabhupada wanted specialized expertise in areas of Krishna consciousness that could establish us firmly within the folds of Western culture. And even when some devotees would go to Srila Prabhupada for a book idea, Prabhupada would say, so, what are your qualifications? You know, and sometimes that would surprise devotees because, well, I mean, Prabhupada, I'm your disciple. I mean, you know, I've been chanting Hare Krishna, you know. But that's not what Prabhupada meant. Prabhupada meant, so what specialized training do you have to be able to do this, to write this book? So, although Prabhupada wasn't strict about that necessarily, that was one of the first things he would inquire. I noticed several different approaches that our godbrothers and sisters have taken with Srila Prabhupada. So the thing that I had sort of been preparing for the longest time, and some of you in here have known me for the longest time, watched me sort of acquiring these kinds of credentials on the outside of the movement. What I was trying to do was position myself to be able to be really an authority on what Srila Prabhupada was doing. So, for those who, on the outside of the movement, would not necessarily be able to accept Prabhupada's, profound contributions, even historical, what to speak of philosophical, theological, even cultural, it was clear that there was a role for someone to come and be an expert on the outside while being on the inside. So that's a little tricky. Over the years, I really thought that in my lifetime I would never see another devotee getting a doctorate in the area of philosophy or Indic studies. And recently I was flown to Belgium to be the keynote speaker at the first ISKCON Academy meeting. Have any of you heard about the ISKCON Academy? More not than half. ISKCON Academy is the first time, scholars and up-and-coming scholars, PhDs, PhD candidates among devotees would come and gather and actually figure out what we're doing. So they had me become the keynote speaker. And one of the things I gave up in I said in my keynote talk was, had I known all of you were going to do this, I would have been finished a long time ago. Okay? I wish someone would have told me that there would be, dozens of doctoral candidates and doctors here in fields related to my field. Because what I did is, and the reason, Karnamrita very sadistically went through the various degrees, that I had achieved at Chicago and Harvard. And part of that was because I didn't know that the community would ever do this. In fact, I was at the University of Chicago in the doctoral program and would have been perfectly content to have gone through that doctoral program. And anyone in the academia knows that the University of Chicago is tops. I mean, it's right up there in the top 10 schools in the country. But to the masses, you tell someone you went to Chicago, say, oh, Chicago State? And which is the biggest insult you could ever hurl at anyone from University of Chicago, right? So Rupanuga called me up and said, Garuda, I think you're the only ones ever going to do this. So I think you need to go to Harvard. I said, I just got here. I was literally 2 months into my work at Chicago, and I said, surely you're just, right? And he said, no, I really think you should go to Harvard. I said, everyone knows the name Harvard. No one knows the name Chicago. I said, how can they not know the name Chicago? What year was this? This was in 76. 76. So I kind of begrudgingly said, okay, so I'll apply and let's just see if I get in. And so I got into the master's program there and went forward there. Anyway, one thing led to the next, and I tried to cover different fields. I was confused as to what field it was that I would choose, given the fact that, who's going to cover all this? Who's going to do this? So this really prolonged my sort of academic trek, and a miserable one it was. The funny thing about me is I don't really like the academy. I'm not sort of an academic person, per se. I never liked sitting in a classroom. I never really liked any of that kind of thing. Anyway, so it all sort of eventually came out that, I would just finish up at Harvard, get my doctorate there. So the first book, which is what I'm going to talk about in my second session, Dance of Divine Love, took me 10 years, and that's partly because of the fact that it was a book that started as a dissertation for Harvard University. And as you'll learn, if you do come to the second session, I never in a million years ever would have been, even me, be so audacious as to write on the Rasa Lila of Krishna. I mean, I didn't just march in there and say, "Oh, Professor Carmen, I want to write on the Rasa Lila." That's not what happened, but I'll give you the story later on that. So that book took 10 years. The Gita, how did the Gita happen?
Getting better.
Yeah. But this took a lifetime in a way. The Bhagavad-Gita, yes, it was a solid 3-year project. But the way it happened was, I was talking to a colleague. But before I tell you about the little story about how the Gita came up, the Gita idea came up, I should tell you that for years, in my 15 years of teaching in the classroom, I have been having my students force purchase Prabhupada's Gita. And not only, and thousands of them have been used over the years in my classes. And so I have had the privilege to actually see how people out there relate or do not relate to Srila Prabhupada's Gita. And it's been a wonderful experience. Now, there's no problem if they didn't relate to Prabhupada's Gita. Why? Because I'm there. And half the time, I would be just basically providing my commentary, my professorial commentary, if you will, and allow the students to sort of come into Prabhupada's Gita with a certain measure of cultivation, enculturation, introduction, etc. I will tell you that other God brothers and God sisters of ours who have been in the academy very shortly now haven't been as comfortable utilizing Srila Prabhupada's Gita in the classroom, which is an interesting thing. I'm very comfortable using Prabhupada's Gita in the classroom, and we can get into that later if need be. But the idea is that I've seen these youngsters come in, 18 through 23, read Prabhupada's Gita. I mean, they had to read certain sections of Prabhupada's Gita. They had to write about the Gita. They had to write about what was Prabhupada intending in this area of the Gita. I mean, I would make them really encounter the text. Okay, this wasn't just getting them to buy it and just let them read it on their own. This was force feed Bhagavad Gita as it is to college students. Otherwise, they wouldn't get a grade. So every 15, 16 months, one person would come up to me and say, "Dr. Schweig, I cannot thank you enough for assigning us the Bhagavad Gita as it is." Of course, then I'm like, okay, why? And they would say, "Because it answers all of my questions." I say, "Really?" And they said, "Yeah." And we're both locked in this gaze. I don't know how many hours we were standing there, but it's kind of like we met each other. We found each other. It was one of those eternal moments of like, yes, But that's only one in every 16 months. Now, that's worth it, mind you. That's worth it. But Bhagavad Gita's, got to reach more people. So a colleague of mine asked me if he could teach the course on Hinduism. And I, because I'm certainly defer to me, because I'm the expert. And I said, "Sure, why not? No problem." He said, "So what Bhagavad Gita would you recommend?" I said, I use Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada's Gita. I mean, that's what I use. He said, "Yeah, it's kind of fat and formal. It's like scary." I said, I don't have to read the whole Gita, of course. It's 800 pages. I don't read that much in the whole semester, practically. But I said, "But you can pick and choose certain parts and so on." And he said, "Yeah." And then he said, "What about?" And he brought up another translation. So we went through about 24 different translations of the Bhagavad Gita, and I gave the pros and the cons. I said, for me, it's not really a problem using almost any Gita, because if they're that bad, I can cut it down like anything. Right in the classroom and tell the students why this is such a terrible Gita, which is the advantage of using something other than Prabhupada's Gita. You can really have quite a picnic about like how terrible this is. On the other hand, what's nice about Prabhupada's Gita is that you are getting the authentic Gita, is what I explain to my students. In fact, when I was teaching at Duke University, I was using Prabhupada's Gita in a course on Indian Studies. And it was filled. I was very popular there. And I had, and so because the course was filled, there were very few seats empty. And so there was, a packed classroom, and there was always one student, this one fellow, would go to the back of the classroom, every single class, sit in the corner, which would allow his head to be rested to brace his head for when he would take his nap. And he would then put his feet up on the desk next to him. Because, he was taking a nap. So it's reasonable that he would want to, spread out. In this class, though, it was a little tight because it was a very filled class. So one day, I started going into introducing the Bhagavad Gita as the next text that we would read. So I said, we're going to read the Bhagavad Gita next. And then suddenly, unexpectedly, this young man's hand went up. I mean, almost like a Hitlerian salute. And I looked at him and I said, yes. I said, good to finally hear from you. And he said, I would like to know, Dr. Schweig, why we are using the Bhagavad Gita of the Hare Krishna movement. I said, I'm so glad you asked me. I am so glad. I said, have you noticed the Quran that I'm using for this semester? Notice who translates it? Ahmed Ali, published by Princeton. I said, the reason I use this is because I want you to get the Quran from one who lives and breathes the Quran. Okay. So with the Bhagavad Gita, I also want you to get the Gita from one who lives and breathes the Bhagavad Gita, and not from me, just a mundane scholar, right? Because they don't know. So, but yeah, okay, yeah, I am a mundane scholar. But truth be known, that's all. That is true. So the idea is that so he retorted a few times about different things, and anyway, he was satisfied that yes, okay, this is a Gita translated and commented on by a venerable, modern sage who lived and breathed the Gita. And it really is hard to argue with. Really, it's quite hard to argue with. So, he thought he could sort of get everyone on his side by emphasizing this is the Gita of the Hare Krishna movement, like a cult. You are bringing the book in from a cult. This did not work. So, I've had fun using Prabhupada's Gita over the years, and will still be using Prabhupada's Gita. Why this Gita? It turned out that, well, what happened is that by the end of this hour discussion, my colleague said, so, Graham, why don't you translate the Gita? And of course, then I laughed. I said, oh, don't be silly. And I said, only a fool would do that. And
not true.
When I need your help, actually, I'll actually solicit it. We're old friends, Okay, good. We appreciate his remarks. Anyway, so the idea, I said, only a fool would do this. And so what happened was, I said, but I wonder, I just got through with the Princeton book. I said, I wonder if Princeton has a Gita on their list. I was curious about that. So I wrote my editor at Princeton. I said, Brigitte, does Princeton have a Gita? Her name was Brigitte. Brigitte, does Princeton have a Gita? That's all I asked. And she wrote back and she said, Graham, that's it. Get a proposal in quickly to Fred. We'll put it through. Fantastic. I said, I didn't ask. All I asked was if they had one. And I'm thinking, this is, no, I'm not going to, what would it look like? What would a proposal look like? So I wrote a proposal. Just in an hour. They went crazy over it. Princeton wanted this. Then Columbia wanted it, because I was also working with Columbia University Press. And then the same colleague of mine put a little bug in my ear and said, Graham, you made it to the top of the academic publication. I mean, you can't get better than Princeton and Columbia. Why don't you go to like the biggest trade publisher? See what they say. So I meandered around this big book exhibit, and I put it in front of Harper. Formerly Harper and Row, now Harper and Collins, right? So I put it in front of them. They hide their editors at these big expositions because they get too many proposals. Somehow they kind of pushed me up there to the editor. And he looked at me and said, can I look at your proposal for an hour and take your Princeton book? It wasn't even out yet. It was just in manuscript form. I said, sure. Came back. He said, I want this book. I said, really? Why? I mean, not that I don't want. I'm just curious why you want this book. There have been many other Gitas around. He said, I read your samples. He said, they're just so much better than the other Gitas around me. So I can understand what you've written. And it's even beautifully composed, whereas the others are just kind of limp, and they use kind of Christian language, and they just don't feel real. This is what the editor said, who himself had a PhD in religion from Columbia, and he went into publishing. He didn't go the way of academia. So the next thing you knew, I was sort of on this roll, and I said, looks like I'm going to do the Gita. And then I realized that what we need what we devotees need is two things. Now, this is where you might take me to task, and I perfectly welcome that, except for I'm sure I'm smart. Okay, so I haven't seen you, so I have to pick on you. Okay, so one is we already do our own Gitas when we speak to people. We already speak our own Gitas. We do it informally. So we do this very, very naturally, especially those of us who have been reading the Gita for, 30, in my case, 35 years, Prabhupada's Gita I've been reading from. Some of us longer than that. Some of us have been around since the blue Gita, the little one. So, the idea is that we're already writing informally, we have our own scripts, our own texts, spoken texts, and how to help people glide into Prabhupada's Gita. What I realize is that we could prepare people more if they could see the power of Western scholarship behind the Gita that introduced it in such a way as to hopefully, powerfully introduce the authentic tradition of the Gita, which would be Prabhupada's. And so this is a kind of what we might say bridge book. Okay. So for outsiders, this is meant to bring in more people than just every 16 months. I'd like to see it maybe every, month. I'd like to increase the schedule. So that's one of the main things this does. Now, it doesn't hurt that, for example, how many of you heard of Houston Smith? The scholar Houston Smith, he's been on Bill Moyer's 5 times as a public TV program that interviews the most famous people in their fields, right? He's written some 20, 30 books. He's the foremost scholar of religion in the world. And he's quite old, and he likes devotees, by the way. He's met devotees. He's not unfavorable at all. So when Harper gave me a list of reviewers for the back of the book, he said, who would you ideally like to review your book, and who would you like to not have your book reviewed? Well, there was one scholar on there that I said, I don't want her review, whether it's the best in the world or not. She just is such a different angle. I just don't want her on there, even though she's famous. Don't want her. Actually, they said, okay. So who would you really like to have? I said, well, the obvious choice here is Houston Smith. I mean, you get something from him. That's probably 30,000 copies sold right there, just from his endorsement. So they said, forget it. We've sent books to him by the dozens over the past few years. He's older now. He's really retired. He's not really well. So just don't even hope for that. I said, okay. Then I said, you got some other good ones here too. His endorsement came back in 2 weeks, the first one.
Wow.
And when I read it, I fell off my chair. I don't know if you remember. I mean, I thought, what? I just went. So this, he wrote, I'll read you the whole thing. It's just 2 sentences. With all due respect to the analects of Confucius, it is safe to say that the soul of Asia has been formed and informed by the Tao Te Ching, the Bodhisattva's vow in Buddhism, and the Bhagavad-Gita. Schweig's new, beautiful, and accessible translation of the Gita, backed by his enormous knowledge and authoritative commentary, will remain the standard text of this marvelous song for years to come, if indeed it is ever superseded.
There must be a God.
Either that or old age really can, as I've been finding out. Memory, that kind of thing. So, I mean, again, a dream review. So then I'm thinking, okay, Krishna must want this, right? Krishna must want this. But I said, no, not until my God brothers and God sisters really appreciate it. They don't appreciate it. I don't care what 20 Houston Smiths would say. Because who does Prabhupada, speak through? I mean, really, who does Prabhupada speak through? He speaks through his disciples, right? He speaks through the compassionate hearts of his most dedicated servants. So this is where I really, I mean, it's nice externally and all the external glitz, and it's all in the Harvard realm, the credential realm, and all that. But that, to me, that doesn't do it. It's how the devotee will receive, this Gita. And now I'll wind up by talking about what I try to offer here for the devotees. This is not just, Bhakti Swami, right? Bhakti Swami. I've never met him, but one day I get an email from him and said, "You may not remember me. We met 30 years ago." Again, this all dates me, And I gave a class on you. I thought you might want to hear it. Okay, here's a Swami I've never met before, right? He gives a class on me, and he thinks I might want to hear it. Sounds pretty dangerous. So I basically downloaded this class with some trepidation, listened to it, and basically it's in response to a son of a disciple of his who happened to be at the University of Virginia where I was teaching, and I happened to be giving a lecture at the Center for South Asian Studies there on this Bhagavad-Gita that I was working on. And he learned that I was a disciple of Srila Prabhupada. And so he wrote back to Bhakti Swami and said, "Who is this Garuda? Who is this Garuda Prabhu who is a disciple? Why would he somehow detract from Srila Prabhupada's Gita? How could he do this? What would be? Isn't this an aparad? I mean, is it like guru? Is he a guru aparadi? It's essentially what Garuda guru aparadi. You could append that to my name, and it's alliterative and kind of has a rhythm to it. So, which worried me because it was tempting, just on that basis. But so Bhakti Swami gave a class that was rather generous and giving me the benefit of the doubt, although he had never read the first book and never had known anything about the second book. He assumed that I was doing this just for the academics. And on that level, it could be justified. I'm here to tell you that that is hardly just what I did it for. I did it for you, my God brothers and God sisters. That's what I did it for. More, actually. A way of giving us a powerful tool to be able to bring others to Prabhupada's Gita more appreciatively. 1. 2, a new way of studying and appreciating the Gita. If anyone has gone to the memories books, you'll find there a little passage there by Pradyumna, a little anecdote from Pradyumna, who says that we were all sitting around one day, and Radhavallabha asked Prabhupada, "Prabhupada, what will you translate next?" And Prabhupada said, "Oh, there are so many things," something like that. He said, "There's the Vedanta Sutra, there's this, there's that, there's Bhagavad-Gita." I'm sure they did a double take, Well, Radhavallabha said, "But Prabhupada, hadn't you already translated the Bhagavad-Gita?" And he said, "Oh yes," he said, "there are so many Gitas, there's so many commentaries, we've done a small part, and there can be others." But, that's a cheap way to justify my doing this, because we all like to say Prabhupada said, yeah. But that's not why I did this. I didn't even know that Prabhupada said that when I embarked on this journey. As you saw, I kind of got sucked into it, sort of without knowing it. So, what I hope this presentation will do is do what Ravindra Swarup said it has done for him when we were at 22nd Avenue together, 26th 2nd Avenue, where we talked about what is the relationship of this Gita to Prabhupada's Gita. His end conclusion was, what has been done here is something wonderful because it allows us to dive more deeply into Prabhupada's Gita. This was his conclusion. And what I've also tried to present here, but very unexpectedly, I discovered something in the verses that I never knew was there. Because, well, let me show you just quickly. The presentation of this is very different than, of course, what we're used to. It's only a 12-page introduction. Very quick introduction to allow the reader to get right into the verses, to encounter the verses for themselves, to see what they're saying. The verses also have but this book has just been out for a week, and I just brought a box of them out there. They're somewhere out on one of those tables, I think near Yadabar's booth out there. You'll see his films, and then you'll see my books. It's kind of somewhere messy. It's a messy display, it's just a box of books. But you'll see, even from where you are in the back, you can see a bunch of little writing on the bottom of the page. Those are undernotes that help the reader to understand anything that's going on in the verse. And you can also see there's a lot of white space on this book, because these verses are translated as poetic verse, which is what they are originally in Sanskrit. As you know, this is philosophical, poetic verse. And so, the most complimentary thing that one god sister of mine said to me when she read this, who was a very critical reader, and she also helped out with this translation, or the book in certain ways. She said, "This is the first time I don't lament that I don't know Sanskrit. I feel the Sanskrit coming through the translation." And that's exactly what I sought to do. So when you read this, you can feel it's even honoring the order and sequencing of the ideas and phrases. It's very strict in the translation. When a word is repeated, so you will see differences between this and Prabhupada's translation. Let's make no mistake about this, okay? But my job is as a textual scholar. I have to be true to my external profession, right? I have to be that doctorate from Harvard, right? I have to be, the best in my field, which Prabhupada also wanted us to be. He wanted us to be the best. But I also have to give us, devotees, a tool to work with, to be able to present the Gita with vigor and to show them that this is exactly what the Gita says. You can look at Prabhupada's Gita from the outside of the movement, and it can appear to be interpolative. It can appear that way. It can appear to be impositional. It can also be appearing to be interpretive as well, right in the verses. Sometimes Prabhupada will put in the word for word yoga. When the word says yoga, Prabhupada will say in the word for word yoga. In the translation, will say devotional service. Now, how did Prabhupada get that? tells you how I got that. You see.
Yeah.
What I discovered is that there is a secret. I translated Bhagavad-Gita here in a rather radical way. The beloved Lord's, that's Bhagavad, right? Gita, secret love song. What I found out here is something after reading the Gita, even prior to coming to the movement, so I've been reading it for 40 years. It wasn't until I read the Gita over the past 3 years and translating it that I found something here that I hadn't read in other commentaries, and yet something that's so central and so essential to the Gita's message that supports and invigorates the traditional commentaries, including Prabhupada. What I found was that there is this message in the Gita that is singing out to us, but I realized why it's a secret. Because we're not ready to hear it. In other words, okay, let me just start here. There's a lot to say here, but I have to look at time and make sure we're good with that. And after this, I want to open up for comments and questions or challenges, or you can even throw things at me if you need to. Fruit is best. Nothing with sharp edges. Nothing with sharp edges. No glasses. No coin. Coins only.
Oh,
no pen.
no.
That's right. Good. Yeah, he's good. He's excited. That's good. Okay. So the idea is that what I discovered is, and all of you will know this. You'll all know what I'm going to be talking about. But you won't recognize this ultimate message right away. You know, in the 4th chapter, Krishna presents the ultimate secret, right? The Bhuyatama, right? Right there in 4.3. This secret yoga that's been lost. He said, I'm giving you this secret today.
Because you're my friend.
That's right. Yeah. Here we go. This same ancient yoga is now spoken by me to you. Quotation, very strict with iti clauses. Having offered your love, you have also become my friend. Truly, this is the ultimate secret. Okay. Having offered your love, you have become my friend. Okay. It's the first announcement of the secret, ladies and gentlemen. Then, in the 9th chapter, now I shall reveal to you this greatest secret. So far, we're getting some idea what this greatest secret is, but we don't know what it is yet. I shall reveal to you this greatest secret, for you are without envy. It is knowledge together with realized knowledge, knowing which you shall be free from inauspiciousness. This is the king of knowledge, the king of secrets, the ultimate means of purification. Understood by direct perception, in harmony with Dharma, it is joyful to perform and everlasting. Then, in the 15th chapter, there's a little bit of a secret going on in the 11th, but that's the 15th chapter, right at the end, Krishna says, thus, the greatest secret of the revealed scriptures, this has been disclosed by me, O faultless one. Having discerned this, one would possess discernment, and one would have acted all that is required to be enacted, O Bhakta. So the secret's pretty heavy. Once you know this, you've done everything. So what is this secret? Well, do you want to hear what the secret is? One of the things that I encountered was that the 18th chapter is the most magnificent orchestration of verses. It is so beautiful. First of all, I talk about this in the section called Textual Illuminations that comes after the translation. And that's 40 pages of commentary and discussion. But the 18th chapter, I have determined parts. The first part is the great secret. The second part is the greater secret. The third part is the greatest secret of all, Sarva Goyatamam. And the fourth part are the concluding benedictory kinds of words in which Sanjaya refers to the whole dialogue as Guhyam Param Yogam, the greatest secret of yoga. So what is this yoga? What is this greatest secret? Where is this secret? The greatest secret, to me, is not necessarily in 1866, the Charma Shloka. The Charma Shloka that Sri Ramanujacharya designated. But that's 2 verses later. That's the climactic.
Charma.
What's that?
What was the word?
Charma Shloka. Charma Shloka. Ultimate Shloka. So in other words, the pinnacle, the denouement, the climactic Shloka, which is traditionally 1866. It's 1864 through 1866 that present the ultimate conclusion and climax to the whole text. Verses 1 through 50 is the great secret. 50 through 63 is the greater secret. Guyatara is the phrase used here. And then Guyatamam, 64 through 66. Let me read to you verse 64. Sarvabhuyatamam bhuya shrinu me paramam vachaha. Ishtosi me dhritamiti. Tato vakshyami te hitam. Now, in Sanskrit, we don't have bold, underscore, italics. Nor do we have smiley faces. If it's going to be emphasized, underscored, its importance extolled, it's put that way verbally. And there are 3 ways in which Krishna does this. First, here still further the greatest secret of all. Okay? Sarvabhuyatamam bhuya. My supreme message, Shrinu me paramavachaha. Okay, that's the second way. Okay. First he's telling us the greatest secret of all. Second thing he's telling us is that it's his supreme message. Okay? And now if that's not enough, he puts it in quotation marks and then presents it in these very simple words. Ishtosi me dhritamiti. You are so much loved by me. Over the years, I have been doing, some of you know this, I've been doing like 2 decades of counseling with devotees. Do you know how many devotees have no idea that Krishna really loves them? So here it is. Double score under, bold face, smiley face, real big smile face on this one. The idea is, this is Krishna's ultimate secret, the greatest secret of all. Why is this the greatest secret of all? Someone once asked me, why would it be secret that Krishna loves us? Because we're not ready to hear it. Because we don't love him that way. And as most of us know, that for any relationship to work, it has to be balanced. If I love you, Swami, but you don't like me at all, and I want to be your best friend, and you look at me like, well, Garuda, you kind of turn me off, man, okay? I like you all right, but I couldn't be your best friend. This relationship will struggle, right?
Jopara and Jomacharya.
No, was that imbalance there?
Well, you went because of that. Jomacharya became very angry.
Ah, okay, so there we go.
He said friends should be about equals, but you're just a pettiness and I'm the king.
Yeah, well, that works here too. No, you're the king. That's what Maharaj means, great king. Remind him of his own namesake. Okay, anyway, the idea is that so Krishna keeps his love. You don't see bumper stickers saying, Krishna loves you.
After
got that. No, but if you understand that it's a secret, you won't do that. Because we're not ready to reciprocate. So Krishna, as we know, stands quietly within our hearts. He's very softly present there. Right? Suvridam sarvabhutana. Right? He's very, very much there. Hridesha Arjuna Tishtati. Right? Stands there in our hearts. So the idea is that he waits for us to turn to him, to offer our hearts to him, and then we can become his friend, like 4-3, right?
Right.
When we offer our hearts to him, which is the meaning of bhakta, we offer our love to him, then we can become his friend, and then that secret can be known.
So Arjuna has already done that.
Yes. Yes. And so, when we finally understand that, then 1865 just makes sense. Then he, be mindful of me with love offered to me, sacrificing for me, act out of reverence for me. Truly you shall come to me. This I promise you, for you are dearly loved by me. What I found is that the Gita is an incredibly loving message from Krishna. It just keeps it away. It doesn't want us to hear it. To obey. I'm just going to stop because I've really spoken plenty of I am in the midst of many learned devotees here, very practiced devotees. Really, floor is open. Oh, yeah, Raj.
Back to the beginning of your talk, you mentioned Ravindra Swarup Prabhu and his degree. Paul Prabhupada was amidst us. Did Prabhupada comment, encourage him, or
Yes.
can you explain how that?
Oh yeah, just simply when Ravindra came to the movement, he was what's commonly known as an ABD, all but the dissertation. It sounds funny, but it's actually used in the academic arena. Like if someone comes to teach, you can show such and such teacher, say, well, yeah, well, what are his qualifications? Well, he's an ABD. And there are a lot of people that stay ABD because the prospect of writing a dissertation with 4 scholars hounding over you, especially at a place like Harvard, it's a very scary thing. Because they all think they know everything. Each one thinks they know everything, right? So each one is like a supreme god that you have to kind of like satisfy. So it's very daunting, very scary. Anyway, he came already with all of his requirements having been accomplished except for the dissertation. So Prabhupada wanted to start, I understand, a Bhagavad University in Mayapur. And Jayapataka Swami was involved in this. And in 1975, this is what happened. And so it was like, this was like going to happen. And so, of course, Ravindra was going to be the one to direct the whole thing. So, of course, he had to finally finish his dissertation. So that's why he got serious about it, and that's why I took over the temple. Even while that, what it's like to run a Rath Yatra when Prabhupada comes, right? Yeah, I mean, it's enough to run a Rath Yatra, right? And Prabhupada coming on time. So, I mean, you can imagine. So I ran the temple. He was finishing his PhD. Then Prabhupada canceled it for some reason. I know Jayapataka Swami has his own story about why. You know how these things have many sides and all that kind of thing. But anyway, nevertheless, Ravindra completed it because he decided to just continue. He was halfway through. He just decided to finish it. And as you know, Ravindra doesn't do a lot with his doctorate. He's in management, and he's very much involved at the heart of this kind. But you asked that because
because Prabhupada was there at the time, and it would have been interesting to note his response. But in my case, I'm kind of the same. I have the same scenario because I was in a master's degree program in photography.
Right.
And I had finished most of my.
Also, Vishaka wasn't she?
She was 2 years. She had a 2-year degree.
Yeah, she has.
From RIT.
She's not here, so we can say it.
But I finished our first film, went away to do my master's degree thesis to India in December 1970, and didn't come back for 2.5 years, took initiation in Calcutta. finished actually Karandra sent us, we had been sending films back, he wanted to do a documentary on the movement. So we completed our first film, and I asked Prabhupada at that time in 1973 whether I should go back and get my degree. His only question was, how long will it take? And I said, a few months, and he said, you should do it.
Well, Prabhupada asked me that, he would have said, I'll do it. I spent 13 years at Harvard.
Well, I think the result is quite wonderful.
Well,
Where is it? The Guinness Book of Records.
do you remember what I said earlier? Yeah. Well, we need your contribution to that.
No, but the point is the Prabhupada did encourage, even at that time.
Yeah, actually, the only thing Prabhupada said about me was Sastra Marsh, he read my thesis, my master's thesis at Chicago under Edward Dimmock. And I sent it to Sastra Marsh, and because he and I were very close and in touch at that time. And he said, "This is fantastic. You smashed certain." What did he say? He said, "You've taken a branch from the tree of impersonalism, turned it into an axe, and chopped the tree down." That's what Sastra wrote. That's great. He's a real supporter of that. And so he said, "You should send this to Srila Prabhupada." I said, "No." I said, "I'm not going to send it to Prabhupada. Prabhupada is sickly. He's trying to write, more on the Bhagavad-Gita." I said, "I am not going to Srila Prabhupada." And so he wrote back and said, "No, you must, because this will give Prabhupada pleasure." He said, "You must do this." I wrote back, I said, "I absolutely refuse. I'm not going to do that." And we got into a fight, a male fight. There was no email back then, but it took some days. And so he said, "If you don't do this, Garuda, I will never write to you again." Right? I said, "Oh boy, what a trip." This is really quite a fight. So a few months went by, and I kind of missed hearing from him because we used to correspond quite a bit. So I finally said, "Okay, I'll send it to Vrindavan." This was Prabhupada's last summer on this earth. So who happened to be there when it got there? It was Satsvarup. Satsvarup happened to be Prabhupada's servant at the time. And so Prabhupada was looking through my thesis, and he was too weak to type or dictate much. He said to Satsvarup Maharaj, he said, "Tell him I am pleased that he's preaching on such a high platform." Now, and so Satsvarup Maharaj wrote that to me and said, the way I take it is, the way I took it at the time was that, I hadn't done anything. I just arrived at Harvard, right? I've only had one year of graduate school. I hadn't really done anything. So, to me, that message was, you better preach on a very high platform. Okay? You better do it. That was what I heard. And so, that's what I'm still trying to do. Anyway, but please, anyone, any questions? And really, do not feel inhibited about challenging me on anything. More of the whys of what I did or what's and so on. Let's go here. Yeah.
So I wanted to thank you very much for doing all your undercover high-level preaching for all these years. It's really very wonderful to hear. And back then, if you were going off to school, you told what Satsvarup Maharaj said and some of it, but wasn't it Maya Prabhu if you were going outside of the movement?
It's funny. For some reason, the devotees back, at least in front of me, never said, "Hey, Garuda, did you have a nice day at the slaughterhouse?" No one ever said that. But if anyone else suggested, I think I'll do what Garuda's doing. This slaughterhouse, Garuda's, I don't know, he's weird. He's different. Garuda can do it, but no. And even Satsvarup Maharaj himself took me up on the 12th floor of 55th Street, New York, and said to me when I got into Chicago, before I went, he said, "Garuda, I'm really concerned. We've had a lot of Sanskrits in this movement fall away. They even become really nasty and inimical, like they knew better than Prabhupada how to translate and this and that and the other." I said, and he said, "I'm really worried that that's going to happen to you." I said, "Swami, one day, if I start having doubts, one day I will quit. I came to this movement to stay. I'm not going anywhere. I will not sacrifice my spiritual life simply to be, a stupid jnani." There's some contradiction in terms of those, but the idea is that I promised him. The other thing I said to Satsvarup Maharaj, I said, "But note one thing, Swami. None of those devotees were trained formally in Sanskrit. They were all self-taught Sanskrits. And I'm getting formal training. So I think that could make a difference. And there is something to be said about that. Prabhupada himself, when there was a devotee passing around cards saying PhD after his name, and they didn't have a PhD for preaching, he was doing this. Prabhupada got a hold of these cards, and his eyes got big, and he looked at Swarup Damodar and said, "This is not allowed." And he said, "It's got, they have to be working with Swarup Damodar, the degree. That's what Prabhupada said. Very heavy about it at one point. So Prabhupada really did not want counterfeit. He wanted the real thing. And he said he wanted devotees to be chairs of departments of religion one day. Being a chair of a department of religion is not an honor in this country. What Prabhupada was talking about is the British system. Because there, when you're chair, that's not administrative. It's an honor, a position of honor. So here, every time there's a departmental meeting that I know they're trying to figure out who's going to be the chair, I actually don't go. I get away with a lot of stuff in my university. But I don't go because I don't want to be even considered for that. So a lot of departments rotate. But what Prabhupada meant was the English system where you're, a leader. That's what Prabhupada wanted us to be, the best at what we do. And frankly, if you had told me 10 years ago, or if Ramaswamy had told me he's known me for a long time, 20 years ago, one day you're ready to know, Princeton and Harper are going to want to publish your book. In fact, there was a bidding war for this book. Princeton and Harper were fighting over this book. They were calling me on the phone every 2 hours, saying and cutting down the other publisher. If you had said that to me, 20 years ago, I would have just laughed. I think it's ridiculous. No way. There's no way I'm going to be able to do that. So this is definitely, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's cause of mercy. Not a day goes by that I don't become amazed at how Garuda Mahaprabhu's grace can work through someone like me with countless shortcomings and have it still work. And that's, one devotee asked, what makes you qualified to do this anyway? I said, I have no qualifications to do this. Just a bunch of mundane qualifications on the outside. But the fact is, it's got to be by Garuda Mahaprabhu's grace. The only way it can be effective. So it is ridiculous. Like I said, only a fool could do this, and I was correct in this case.
Well, you must have a lot of love for Prabhupada. You don't do all that hard work and stuff.
Well, sometimes I wish I went to Harvard Law School. I could make more money and give money to other projects that are so much needing, and sometimes people ask me for money, right? I said, I should have gone to Harvard Law, okay? Harvard Divinity doesn't give you that kind of return on the receipt that they give you out there. So there was a comment here, then I'll go here.
Well, I haven't read what you've printed and wrote, but I was surprised, kind of curious to find out how, by reading that, are they going to move on to Bhagavad-Gita?
In other words, how would one use this in conjunction with Bhagavad-Gita?
Yeah,
Bridge.
And be inspired, because it won't take me through my life. You never read that. I'm content. People are not that philosophical in maybe in your area.
Yeah.
Generally speaking.
There is a footnote to a paragraph on the second page of writing. It's a little subtle, but it's there. That points out that Vaishnavism. This is a book that arises out of the Vaishnava traditions, which has been there for countless centuries, and then, of course, in the modern age, has been spread all over the world. Number one, footnote. Down there it says, this was the work of Bhaktivedanta Swami. And I mentioned who spread it all over the world, and whose Bhagavad-Gita is by far the most widely published Gita in the world. That should send a message to them. I also mentioned Prabhupada in the bibliography, Prabhupada's Bhagavad-Gita as it is in the bibliography. And then I also mentioned Prabhupada in the acknowledgments. So there's sort of all the people mentioned in here, aside from Krishna and Arjuna, the most, but one devotee, one godbrother of mine said, could you have mentioned Prabhupada more? And I said, any more than that would have been a little obvious, but this is just right. If they're really interested in more, they'll respond to the content and they'll want to know more. And it's the only Vaishnava Gita that I mentioned here. The other couple are really academic Gitas.
This is a practical point to me, because I'm like teaching at the university, we have the Bhagavad-Gita.
Right.
So will you recommend we have both Gitas there, or?
Why not? Why not? Let them see it together. Well, since you happen to know me, you could say, well, he's called Graham Schweig, but I know who he really is. He's that jerk I knew 20 years, 30 years ago. His name is Garuda.
I think this is Lakshmi's point too, Lakshmi.
Yeah.
That, I think it might be the best way to do it, to have a bridge, but at the same time, they're not going to take 2 years.
Okay, so you know what? Obviously, if they're really attracted to Prabhupada's Gita, that's where they should go.
But how will they know that? Just by being covered?
No. Look inside.
It depends on me, though, when I tell them. You're coming up to the table, they've never been there. They say, oh, what is this?
Okay.
This is our Bible, Bhagavad-Gita.
Well, a seasoned preacher as yourself will know whether this is something that they can really absorb and handle, or like a lot of devotees come up to me and say, you know what, I'm so glad you come up with this, because I can't give my relatives Prabhupada's Gita. It's just too much for them. It's too much.
Yeah.
And they need to be
impressed.
And they need to be impressed. And they need to be impressed. They need the academic lore. That kind of thing.
How much for a case?
For you,
okay, Rita?
Being that into publishers, maybe always just the right time.
No, I can. Out here, I'm selling it for just a little bit over my cost. $20. It's $25 at Amazon, Borders Books, and all that. But I get it for about $18 and some shipping. But I can get for a larger amount. I can get lower if there's a quantity.
Still, how will I know whether I should get it larger?
Oh, you have to read
I
it.
do. I distribute a lot of Bhagavad-Gita.
Yeah.
We go
So
also to the Hindus, at the Indian stores, we have table. We have festivals, Ratyach. I mean, one guy took 50 Gitas for me the other day.
Well, you shouldn't stop that. My gosh.
But still.
And
I
I'm
have
not.
to read it this time.
Yeah, when you read it, you'll know who should get this.
Okay, thank you.
Because there'll be people that.
Thank you for this donation. I appreciate it.
Very happy to offer. There, in the bag it goes. There.
Before you change your mind.
It's an old airport trick.
Yeah, that's right.
And reverse.
Yeah, it's an old Swami trick too. Did I? Swami, then we'll go to Dulak. Yeah.
I had a simple question. We're preaching to people sometimes on the street, sometimes in college settings, sometimes, on the web or other kinds of things. Is there, for people who don't interact with the academic community, is there something we should have in mind or something that we should keep in the back of our mind as we're dealing with these different issues that would be sort of harmonious with dovetailing in the academic community rather than doing things that might be more difficult to work in? Because I don't know what it's like to deal with the academic community.
So are you saying that when we as devotees approach the academic community?
No. When we're well, these are different settings, and there may be different answers to these different settings. If you're approaching a person on the street, should there be anything we have in our mind that might eventually backlash or back off into the academic community we're approaching? We're doing a college program, reaching the kids on campus, or let's say we're in a setting like we're presenting something on the web. Because, generally we don't think in terms of the academic community. We're not directly approaching them.
Right.
They may be a ricochet.
Right.
So what would you suggest we keep in mind in those cases?
That is a complex question. I think that the idea here is that as a seasoned preacher, that so many of, I'm in the midst of many, many seasoned preachers here. I think that there's a point, don't you feel that there's a point when you dialogue with someone, you get to know who they are, and you don't stop. I I mean, if you have to make it quick, that's one thing, okay? But if you can dialogue enough and long enough with someone to find out what really tends to impress them, move them, interest them, then I think we generally give them the right. It's not just, Prabhu's-Gita or Garuda's Gita. It's, Prabhu's Gita, or is it the Bhagavad-Gita? Is it On the Way to Krishna? Is it Ishri Upanishad? I mean, there are so many books, right? So what's the right book? I think it's part of the broader question. What's the right book for the particular person? And I just think that a seasoned preacher is going to know that. As Swami, after he stole the book, he said he's going to read it, and so he's going to know what's in that book, and he'll say, you know what, this person needs to be a little impressed by a guy who's been at Harvard, and will allow him or her to appreciate what Prabhupada's Gita is trying to do. Let me have them start with this. And then there are people that, haven't you ever given Prabhupada's Gita to someone and they kind of look at it like, well, okay, there's a lot here, I'm a little overwhelmed, or that, there's certain statements in Prabhupada's Gita that are a little difficult to understand and require more, shall we say, mentoring. This Gita is meant to. This Gita is meant to be kind of like a kind of self-contained Gita, which allows you to bounce off further into Prabhupada's Gita, and that was the whole idea. But I'm sure that if you read it, you'll know the right applications for it. And it would be also interesting to see if someone looks at Prabhupada's Gita and looks at this other Gita, let them choose. Let them look at it. Let them choose it. And if they need a little help to understand it, you say, this is a good entry-level book, the Harper Gita. This is a little more advanced. If they want to go right to the advanced stuff, tell them to go for the Prabhupada's Gita. And they both do different things. Sell them both. That's what Ravindra's doing. He's reading both. He said one can help me understand and appreciate more deeply the other, and kind of have a kind of dialogue going on in my reading instead. Let me go over here to Abdullah over here.
Well, you're the one who's actually dealing with students in a student setting, probably more than any preacher in this room. So you said once every,
16 months.
You get that thrill of somebody appreciating devotional service as something that's going to really assist them. Whereas you're feeling that this Gita that you've just done is going to bridge a gap, and that light bulb may go off more frequently. So my real question is, since you're working with them, you know where the mindset is, can you pass that on to us as to how to use this tool? Because everybody wants to light the spark.
Okay.
So, and you've had difficulty dealing in the academic field, lighting the spark that often with Prabhupada's Gita. Now you think you've made a brighter flame. Why?
In one sense, I haven't had difficulty using Prabhupada's Gita. This is why I've been selling thousands of them over the years. What I find myself doing is writing the Gita that I've just written. In other words, so
in your presentation,
right. And so basically, this Gita is itself the result of so much teaching on the Gita, and a result of discovering some of these jewels unexpectedly. I didn't know that were there.
The sharing that part was quite.
Yeah, the Sargabuyatama. Yeah, but it's unexpected. After writing this book, I'll just tell you. We're here. I'm here with friends and family. You're my family. I have to say that, after translating and writing and going into the Goswami commentaries and different.
This is one of the pictures.
You can see it from there. I've learned your tricks. I felt that Krishna was, our Lord, who was frankly very busy enjoying pastimes, and and frankly had very little time to appreciate what was going on down here, and in our challenges, and that that's great because we don't really belong down here anyway. So let's get back up there, and yeah, it's a lot of suffering down here. The sooner we get out of here, the better, and that's fine. But in the Gita, I realized that, my gosh, do you know how many times Krishna speaks about coming to him? I explained in the introduction to this Gita that you've stolen how Krishna is the Supreme Lord, everything he contains everything. And yet, he has this divine yearning for our hearts. This is so... Not a day goes by when I don't think about this. And it's just amazing. He actually yearns for our hearts. He's not just satisfied to just keep doing this. He actually yearns for our hearts.
Where he says, no one is more dear to me than him. He explains his secret to the innocent.
Yes, in the end, toward the end.
Very end.
Yeah, the Gita. So, I mean, he wants this secret to be revealed. So it's. I have to say, the last 3 years have been transformative for me. Really, very transformative. You don't know me anymore. Okay. So wait, below. Yeah.
How much is that book? How much is that book?
Oh, this one is 30. And this. No, we're not doing this in here.
No, for miles.
We'll do this after. This is a 448-page book put out by Princeton. And that's another miracle that Princeton took this book. I mean, again, and I'll talk about that in the second session. But the idea is that yes, I've had this interaction, as you say, Geologic. I mean, I have.
Well, of course, not to interrupt.
Go ahead.
Next after sabbatical, which Bhagavad-Gita is going to be in the classroom.
I was going to use both. I was going to make them buy both. First of all, Prabhupada. Yeah, exactly.
You're a professor.
They don't pass unless they get what I told them to get. I was going to really experiment with this. I'm so used to using Prabhupada's Gita in a way that feels more natural, and probably just continue doing that.
But wouldn't you want to light the fire every month instead of every 16?
Well, then, okay. That's why we use both. And I would actually show them how they can dive more deeply into a text. So this would be kind of the in-depth study of the Gita. This is what I actually haven't figured it out yet, Jill. You're asking me a question that I can't fully answer yet. I'm sort of experimenting. So I didn't expect to come out of this, whatever. No, yeah.
Well,
I'm sorry. I have to go here. Go here and then there. Okay, good. You had your hand up several minutes ago.
Okay. So, Guru, I have a new appreciation of what you shared. New appreciation of the value of your service. And so I'm wondering, the future of our movement in terms of our second generation, third generation, taking up the academic path like you are exemplifying. Because I have heard over the years some of our stalwart leaders decrying devotees taking the academic path. I mean, I could mention names, but it doesn't really matter because a leader in our movement says that going to college is not for devotees. I mean, more distinct terms.
Yeah.
So how do you do that?
Well, I can't necessarily respond to different neuroses that may be out there. But I mean, saying that going to college is not for devotees is like saying being a car mechanic is not for devotees. And saying, and in other words, to make those kinds of across-the-board statements, I find troubling because Prabhupada taught us we can use anything in Krishna service. Now, it doesn't mean that we as devotees can use anything in Krishna service. We have different proclivities. We learn this, right? We have swadharmas. We have particular capacities and so on. So, you know, I think some devotees could do this very well. It's not an easy path. There's no easy task to go into the classroom, listen to these professors spout their various, you know, philosophies and some of the things that are very contrary to what it is that we know and accept and so on. So it's not easy. It's not easy. But then, you know, going to the hardware store and buying hammers and electrical instruments and so on, I mean, I don't know how to do that, and, you know, I think that's Maya too, you know. I mean, if I went to the hardware store and bought drills, and you see me in the hardware store, kick me out of there. Because I don't know anything about it. I don't know how to use build a building. I mean, that's not me. That's not what I do. So, again, I think that we have to be careful and not make these kind of blanket statements. By and large, getting a doctorate is not going to be something that most people do. Most people don't get a doctorate. You know, it takes a certain level of passion and commitment and a certain, you know, intellectual ability and tendency.
What I'm thinking also needs the community support to pursue that path because of the length of time, the difficulty, and so on and so forth. So, I mean, as a community, as a family, movement, you know, we're going to have to adjust our...
Yeah.
You know,
well, like I said, many devotees supported me for some reason all these years. And you know, Frida Nandamars used to call me up every year and say, "Garuda, why are you at Harvard?" Every year you call me up. I'm telling you, it would happen like clockwork. I said, "Well, Swami, you know, I'm trying to infiltrate Prabhupada, but we're not to infiltrate, blah, blah, blah." You know. Anyway, finally the third year he called up and I said, "Okay, I'm going to let him have it." I said, "Swami, okay, I'll tell you why I'm doing this, okay? Your danda doesn't mean a hill of beans to..." Excuse me, Swami. It doesn't mean a hill of beans to anyone in the intellectual world. To our world in ISKCON, of course it means something. But out there, and the reason why Chaitanya Mahaprabhu took up the danda was to convince the intellectual class of persons. I said, the PhD from Harvard is the most powerful danda of the age for doing that. And I hung up on him. The next thing I heard, he was back in school.
You did.
I didn't intend to. And so it was when Swami went back to school and got his doctorate at Harvard, and we landed at the same time, actually, when I started finishing up. He did his in 3 years, I did mine in 13. Some people are just a little smarter than other people. But as I mentioned, I got many masters. He doesn't have any masters. So I did, you know, a very gradual way. But when he got, see, it was he that brought this to the attention of the mass of devotees that this was a possible avenue to take. Garuda was an aberration and a weirdo for the longest time, but suddenly it wasn't such a bad thing to do. If Swami, although many people objected to why was a Swami doing, that's another issue. But the point is that, again, this is stuff that needs to be done. And I appreciate that you appreciate more what it means to do this kind of thing. And it is gratifying to do this kind of work. But it's heavy tapas. Heavy tapas. I mean, really grinding this stuff out is very, very hard. It makes you take shelter of Garuda Mahaprabhu's mercy quite a bit, because you can't do it yourself. At least I can't.
It's kind of hard to formulate, but I guess, would it be fair to say that, because when we hear that there's another Gita coming out, I think there's a certain, maybe I'm the only one, but I suspect, because you're just in the conversations around, I mean, obviously you've explained it very clearly why you're doing it, and it makes a whole lot of sense. But there's an idea of change that kind of grabs the heart a little bit.
That's right.
And that's clear in our movement, or we wouldn't have the dialogue or the controversy we have over the edits to that's still a controversy today. So I guess the question is it fair to say that one of Prabhupada's main objections, if not the main objection to all the other Gitas, was they weren't coming from the perspective of a devotee. They weren't having by devotees. Was his main objection. And that perhaps, is it also fair to say that perhaps we are more attached on certain levels to the way Prabhupada originally wrote the Gita than even perhaps Prabhupada was himself, in the sense that, I mean, he himself, if you read some of the older things he wrote, he also adjusted for the times. And could you speak about that a little bit? If you think that's a fair assessment.
Yeah, well, I appreciate your comment that in a way, one of our godbrothers came out with a Gita that kind of rhymes. It's a little sing-songy, and it's part of the Gita. It's very nice and innocuous, and no one's terribly threatened, like, Kalakanta's a guru operati. Throw him out, get him banned, And then some other people have done some different things, bringing commentaries out and doing this and so on. And nothing seems to be terrible. But this Gita, I'm well aware that it could be something that could be somehow like, well, as Dr. Vikas Swami's letter to me indicated, something that, are we replacing? And even at the Sunday Feast Lecture of Potomac that I just gave a couple of weeks ago, one devotee there, not a regular one, you're traveling through, but said, so Garuda Prabhu, you're saying that Prabhupada's Gita is insufficient. I said, no, I've never said that Prabhupada's Gita is insufficient, but that we have different tasks in preaching. In fact, there probably should be 20 different Gitas. There could be a Gita that does this, there could be a Gita that does that, but I think they all should point to what Prabhupada's message is. I think that's the whole point. We do have a godbrother that did a Gita. He doesn't know Sanskrit, but he calls it a translation and a commentary, and presents a more esoteric vision of the text. Gets into more of the, sort of more, what we might say, advanced level of. But to me, that distracts from the message of the Gita. It also can give license to other sects, non-Vaishnava sects, saying, if they can read that into the Gita, you can read the gopis are in the Gita. Oh, well, I'll put, Shiva in there, and really, this is not Krishna, this is Shiva speaking, through Krishna. But anyway, the point is that, it's just a free-for-all. We don't want to give other devotee or scholar, translators and commentators a license for just a free-for-all with the Gita. What we want to do is present it powerfully and effectively and enliven a culture based around the Gita. If this Gita doesn't do this, then that will be a very sad day for me to learn that. I think it does it, but I'm not sure. I'm waiting for you, Kanti, to read the Gita and let me know.
Well, I've already had the situation that you're talking about. I give the Gita to somebody that seemed quite ready for it and was anxious. And then, Prabhupada's Gita is quite massive. Sometimes you think, well, maybe we should give them the abridged version, or I sometimes find an old copy of the abridged version that doesn't have the purports in it.
Yeah, it's formidable, it's intimidating, unless you're this devotee who can't get enough and wants to gobble up everything. And that's all of us. We can't get enough. We were just, we like to drown in this stuff.
And it may be somebody else too, but
they
got to be able to crack it first and say, well, I want to know more about this.
Exactly. How are we doing time-wise? Am I going 4:30? We're out. Yeah. Kasha, that's it. Just warming up now, yeah. I think for that, I really have to stop. We want to move on to other sessions. I do have another session coming up in 15 minutes. 10 minutes. 10, 15 minutes. Thank you very much.